Hello fellow Gwent players. Now you know I like to review your guys' custom cards from time to time. I don't do it as much as you guys probably want me to, but it is now time for you, the viewer, to review my cards. But those are not custom cards that I'm bringing upon you. They're actual just card reworks of existing cards that are in the game and that I feel like if a little, rework happens or like a little change happens to those cards, they might actually see competitive play. So I made a list of 2 bronzes and 2 golds for every faction, and I think 2 bronzes and 1 gold for the neutrals. I only changed 1 neutral gold because I do think that golds and neutral golds in general are a bit hard to balance, and it's actually a really bad balance change, honestly, to my gold card, but we'll get to there. I'm not gonna say that all of these cards have to be changed to the way that they are, that I want them to be. It's just some of the cards have very lackluster effects that just shouldn't be in the game, and I feel like these cards do need to be reworked, and I think some of them I feel like are pretty good reworks. Some of them are a bit unbalanced, one would say, and might need some play testing, but, CDPR doesn't do that really much. And yeah, so let's just jump right into it. And we're gonna start with Wolfpack. By the way, some of these cards their flavor text might not be correct. Some of them might have a bit of weird explanations or subtext to them. So sorry about that. I tried to do these as well as I could, but some obviously will fall through, and if you start doing the other one and realize you made the mistake, it's a lot of work to actually do these custom cards. So I appreciate the people who actually do them now. But yeah, let's get to Wolfpack. Deploy, damage an enemy unit by 2. Alright, seems quite familiar. Retribution, damage it by 4. Okay, so I've added a new new keyword to the game. Now, what does retribution mean? So we have deploy, obviously this triggers the ability when it's played, and retribution is when a copy of this is in the graveyard. So you have played 1 Wolfpack already and it goes into the graveyard, meaning that the second Wolfpack will trigger the retribution ability. Now I feel like this card could see actual play within something like Beast Skellige now, because you have discard package in that as well, so you can go and discard some of those wolf packs out of your deck or out of your hand and then play a 2 deal 4 card, which is honestly a very strong ability on a 4 provision card, but there is obviously some setup required for that. Whether this card is balanced or not, I don't know. I feel like it is a very interesting change to the card and its existence. And you are going to see this retribution ability come, I think, a few more times. For example, with Peasant Militia, which reads deploy boost an ally unit by 2, retribution boosted by 4. So we have the same retribution. It's kind of the same design as Wolfpack. It's obviously not as good as Wolfpack because dealing 4 damage is a lot more powerful than, boosting by 4. But I mean, it's the same kind of design philosophy that I went with on these retribution cards. This card will always be bad. I think Peasant Militia by design is just a bad card, and it could always stay a bad card, but the retribution, it has to be added to this card as well if it's added to the wolf pack. So I thought, hey, why not just give it to Peasant Militia? And that's all my neutral bronzes. I'm actually going to start with the bronzes first, and then move on to the spice, the real good spice. Also, I'm not going to do these in any kind of particular order, so I'm just going to, choose random cards that I've designed and just go off the top. I just wanted to start with the neutrals to show you the retribution tag and retribution keyword that I added to this mini rework. So we have Nilfgaard Mangonel. It's a machine, a siege engine, okay. Nothing has changed there, obviously. Ranged, whenever an enemy unit gains spying, damage adjacent units by 1. Now, if you don't know what the current Mangonel does, it is a deploy ranged that damages an enemy unit by 1. For every spying unit adjacent to it, increase the damage by 2. Now, this could play for a potential 8 points, and yeah, it could play for an 8 points, but it is incredibly insufficient because it requires quite a lot of setup. And what I thought to myself when I designed this card, or when I thought about this card, is that it should kind of be an extra support to spies, because spies has 1 or 2 engines. That's the aristocrats and the enforcers, both of which don't really feel like they're enough to sort of push the archetype. Now, I put this at 6 provisions because it could technically deal 2 damage whenever you play a spy or like give spying. It is very strong with something like Fergus. And I didn't think it was too good with something like Usurper because Usurper always spawns to the furthest right anyway. But yeah, with Fergus, this could be a very, very powerful card, and you will definitely have to deal with it. At 6 provisions, I do think it's justified though, because it's very similar to something like a Carrick Frigate, where those points are proactive, but you're playing Nilfgaard and you don't need proactive points if you're Nilfgaard, so you have these damage cards. And this could also make a Mage Infiltrator deal 4 damage to adjacent units, which is pretty cool. And I think that, I'm not sure if this card would be OP or oppressive in any way. I feel like at its stat line with the 4/6, it doesn't feel too bad. It's also ranged lock, which is actually quite important to note because it can be moved. And yeah, I just feel like this card seems very combo heavy, and in general, like, Spies is a very combo heavy deck. Is the problem with it though is like, if at least like 2 of your, like, you have like a limit of engines that work or synergize with Spies, and the rest of Spies is kind of just like point slam cards, whereas this is just an additional engine that this archetype gets to sort of go to the next level, because I don't think that Spies currently is very good in Nilfgaard. There are good cards within the archetype, it's just the archetype itself isn't that great. And here we have Arachnospore, plant. Oh, the mighty plant archetype. Thrive, deploy, damage a random unit by 2, Deathwish, repeat the deploy ability. So this card might seem familiar to some of you because this is what this card used to be before they nerfed it. Back in the days, this was a really, really strong card. Like, it was kind of on par with like Endrega Larva with the value that it could get, because killing it really just was a downside, and killing a 1-point unit is definitely a downside if you use big removals for it. But with the power creep and, you know, Endrega Larva existing, I feel like Arachnospore does now justify the fact that it could be a Thrive unit and just be a very annoying card for the opponent to deal with. And cards like Bruxa are just kind of like the same ability, but like this you don't want to kill, whereas Bruxa is quite easy to kill. And yeah, I mean, Arachnospore, maybe it shouldn't be 1 point though, maybe it could just be 2 points as well, since it does or would thrive with the Endrega Larva as well. We can, you know, work on the numbers there obviously, but I feel like this getting Thrive back definitely is something that could happen, because like I think the card would be fine if it has Thrive, because like as a Deathwish card, it's just not good enough. And next up we have Blue Mountain Elite. Now this is one of my, I think, favorite designs that I made this video, is whenever you have 9 cards on a row, summon self from deck on the opposite row. So basically you need to have a full row, which does limit your play quite a bit, but you get a payoff of thinning your deck by 2 cards for 6 tempo, as well as giving you 2 additional elves for something like Ellerin. And that's just kind of good. Like, it seems very busted, but it does have a very high, you know, maintenance cost. It is quite difficult to get a bunch of units on your side of the field, and it does limit certain aspects of your game for sure. For example, things like Gezras is not able to be procced when this is triggered. So you want to get this out in like earlier rounds, but I do think that this is actually perfectly fine compared to how its current form is, because its current form is just weak. Its current form is just a bad form of Doblathana Archer, I think. No, it's not Doblathana Archer, it's Doblathana Bowman, I think. Yeah, that's the card. It's basically a bad version of that card right now, and I feel like if it had an effect like this, where these guys would jump out of your deck when something happens, and I feel like the 9 cards on a row is definitely a expensive enough cost for these guys to be able to jump out for the 6 power, and it just gives you a nice little tempo boost and thins your deck by 2 cards. Maybe it's too strong, I'm not sure. Maybe the 3 power is a bit too much. But I do feel like that the condition for it to be triggered... I mean, I'm just repeating myself at this point. I kind of want to just know what you guys think about this one, because I was actually kind of proud when I thought of this. And Maybe it's busted, maybe it's just not good, but like I do think this can see play in some decks. It's not going to see play in every deck, but it can see play in some decks. All right, moving on to Skellige, Svalbard Cultist. I bet you guys didn't know this card existed. I mean, obviously, I do know it exists, but this card is, like, just a bad version of Priest, pretty much. And deploy, I made it a deploy. It used to be an engine. The deploy says damage a unit by 2. If it triggers Berserk, boost self by 3. Now, this is a very... I thought this was a pretty cool idea, honestly. Like, you could use this as a 7 for 5, which is kind of like the standard right now. But, like, you want to get more value out of 7 for 5s these days anyway. So I thought, hey, why not add this additional ability that kind of is also a bit lore-friendly, or, like, gives that flavor with the Berserk and the Svalbard synergies, where if it triggers the Berserk, it becomes an 8 that, you know, trigger the Berserk, which is a pretty cool ability. It might make some cards see more play. For example, like Queen's Guards is kind of good with this. The best card with this, I think, is the Berserker, the Drummond Berserker, where you do lose out some points, but you're gaining some nice points additionally to that as well. So there's some interesting combos you can make with this card. Also, I guess Wildcarl, but you probably shouldn't play this with Wildcarl. But yeah, also just damaging a unit by 2. Like, in the worst case scenario, it plays for 7, and that's never bad. The thing with the current, like, bad cards in Gwent is that they're so conditional and so power crept that they never really feel good when you play them or put them in your deck. They're either hyper synergetic or they just don't play for enough points. And I feel like cards like this, or like reworking cards into like more powerful effects to adjust to power creep, especially in this case, I feel is proper. So yeah, Svalbard Cultist, I'd say it's a pretty cool card, honestly. Next up, I have Werewolf. Now, this card is a 4/4 immune unit, pretty much useless in this current state of the game. So I thought I'd give this a very spicy rework. This might be a bit too good, to be honest. This might be an effect of a gold card, but it does have a bit of a condition. So it keeps its immunity, but it has a Death Wish, which spawns and plays a random bronze beast from your deck. So basically, you do require certain cards like Rat King or Endrego Warrior for this to trigger. Now, obviously, that's a deck building cost that comes with this card. Also, you need to have enough beasts that synergize with this. Also, I went for the route of spawning and playing the random bronze, because if it would just be spawned, it would be really powerful with something like Griffin. Whereas with Griffin, if it spawns and plays, it doesn't, you know, have that. It has to be played and has to destroy a unit for it not to just be an 8, like a 12 for 6. Like, that just seems kind of broken on a bronze card. Haha, looking at you, Viper Witcher Mentor. But yeah, I feel like this card has a condition and a deck building cost that I feel like justifies its ability. In general, I want more bronze cards to have an impact on games, and I feel like this is a bronze card that really does impact games to a certain degree. And it could be a staple in something like Beat Skellige, or generally just like consume Skellige. Not Skellige, why am I saying Skellige? Sorry, it's consume monsters. So yeah, Werewolf, I think it's a very interesting design. I'm not sure if it becomes playable with this change, but I do feel like a bronze being able to thin another bronze for 6 provisions and a little bit of a deck building cost is definitely a nice and interesting ability. And after this comes our first Syndicate card. I think I went for 2 bronze monsters already. Oxenford Naturalist, human, profit 1, fee 2, give an allied unit Veil. Now, this card is debatable as to how good it actually is, because you could say it's just a bronze Kalkstein, but in reality it really isn't, because Kalkstein can also be used defensively on something like Defenders or Vitality, whereas this more synergizes with the self-poison archetype and might become a staple within that archetype, because giving Veil to certain cards does make that archetype really, really powerful. It works with cards like the Blindheim Brother. Also, I guess early on, if you want to play the Abomination, this also kind of works really well with it. I'm not sure if the numbers on this are correct, though. Like, I know that Ryla, the Fallen Rayla, has a fee of 3 of gaining Veil, but she also gains 3 profit, so it's pretty much free. Whereas here, it's like a profit 1, fee 2, so it plays for 5, and then you have to have an additional coin for it to actually trigger, or have additional coins to actually trigger. But yeah, I feel like this card, obviously in its current form or current design, I might actually want to show you this one because you probably don't know what this card actually does. Where it's profit 2, fee 1, give an allied unit vitality for 1 turn. It's just a bad armor smith at the end of the day. Because armor smith is just miles better because you can target 1 unit with all your money. This, you need like 9 units to be able to get the points efficiency that the blacksmith can get as well. And I also thought that just flavor-wise, it being able to give Veil makes kind of sense. You know, it's some naturalist giving Veil, you know, it's like, you know, it helps against the poisons, you know, and you have the self-poison archetype in Syndicate. So yeah, I thought this was a pretty interesting one. Not sure if this is printable though. This is a very questionable choice of mine, but I do feel like Syndicate need a Veil giver in their faction for the self-poison archetype to actually become viable, because it is okay now, but it's still not that great, to be honest. And next up I have Rune Word. Now this is a very slight change. Apparently Rune Word is a human and a mage, so I'm sorry about that. Give 2 adjacent units shield and give them vitality for 3 turns. Right now in its current state, I would say Rune Word is unplayable with giving it shield and 4 vitality, whereas with this it becomes a 6 with some shield synergies and also some synergies with things like Pastodi or the Tridom Infantry. And in general, like, giving 2 adjacent unit shields seems like a very powerful ability. I'm not sure how much this will change this card. It plays for 4 tempo, but it does have a very powerful effect, honestly. Like those 2 shields could be very useful. And yeah, I guess it kind of sucks against like a Thirsty Dame, but if you play like shield decks, this could be kind of good. It's not going to change the card and its playability, but it will definitely make the card better. And, you know, if you want to spice up a meta, you want to add cards that just are different from the like previous versions, where people will experiment with this card and maybe they will find some interesting combos with it. And I do feel like this card definitely, in its form that I've presented it in, does have the potential to be playable. Maybe as a one-off. Probably not as a two-off. One-off, I could definitely see this being played in like Shoop or Redea decks. And here I have Scoia'tael Neophyte. Elf. Deploy, spawn and summon a base copy of this unit to the other allied row. Retribution. Repeat the deploy ability. So this card in its current state is a 4. I haven't really changed the main design behind it. But in this case, the Retribution is a lot better since you do have the Enshade Saber stratagem where you're basically able to already spawn 2 of these, and if your opponent somehow kills both of them, you are able to immediately get the Retribution value of this. And also because you spawn 2 copies of this, it's very easy to get the Retribution. Now I know in its Retribution form it just gets 6 points, but it gives you 3 elves. And 3 elves can get you quite a long way, both in a swarm aspect or in general just giving extra value to cards like Isengrim or even Yavin, because in its Retribution it basically spawns 2 Neophytes on the opposite row. So I do feel like this change could definitely make a little bit of a difference. Not sure if the card will see play, obviously. I could definitely see this card being run in like Elf Hyper Swarm decks, you know. It's not a major change that might put it into playability, but it's a change that, you know, could make the card see some experimentation. And maybe there will be some interesting combos you can pull off with this. Next up, I have the Van Morlehem Servant. Deploy, give an allied unit vitality with duration equal to the number of enemy units with status. Retribution boost instead. So another Retribution card. This one's a bit more difficult to pull off than the Neophyte, but I do feel like this is very similar to the bonded ability of something like a Bearmaster, but I feel like with this card it makes a lot of sense for it to be Retribution, also because of the flavor. You know, if you're a Van Morlehem Servant, I don't think your life expectancy is that long, even though she looks quite old, so I gotta give credit to her. She does look quite old on this art, but I do feel like it's kind of good flavor, because if you're a servant of the Van Morlehems, you're going to become meat anyway at some point. In general, this card ability seems a bit underrated in my opinion, and if they do change it to something like this, it could definitely see a lot of play in Nilfgaard lists, because it's just kind of like a point efficient for provision bronze, and Nilfgaard doesn't have that many of those. They have good control options in the 4-piece slot, but not many point efficient cards, and this would probably be one of those if a change like this were added to it. And here I have Drummond Warmonger. Now, if you guys played Beta Gwent, you will understand the reason why I picked these two cards for this rework. If not, maybe ask in the comments. It's a long story. So yeah, when this unit is discarded, spawn and play Gutting Slash. So this synergizes with the discard archetype, and it plays for a 5/5, just like the Skirmisher, which would play for a 4/4. So I feel like discard is a very strong archetype in something like Lippy, but I feel like this card just is cool, right? Like, honestly, isn't that just cool? Like, discarding a card and then being able to, like, spawn and play a Gutting Slash. Like, that's just awesome. I don't know. I kind of like this design. Like, I'm just patting myself on the back here, but, like, it might seem a bit broken, honestly. I feel like this card might be a bit broken with discard already being semi-decent. But, yeah, I feel like you can add the discard package to more decks then, and maybe even to the pirate archetype, this works as well. But I felt like I just wanted to make this card. I don't know. I kind of like this design of if you discard a card, it damages a unit. It could be like damage a random enemy unit by 4, but I kind of wanted to pair up these two card arts, Gutting Slash and the Drummond Warmonger, for some good old beta flashbacks. And some of you guys know what I'm talking about. And here we have Arena and Drega. Insanity, fee 1, damage an enemy unit by 1, cooldown 1. Now this is pretty much exactly the same as it was before, but whenever an enemy unit dies, gain 2 coins. So this is, I think, a change that might be a bit too good, but it is definitely quite difficult to set up as well. This card definitely works in bounty decks, for sure, and not sure if it's good anywhere else, but if you want to play bounty, I think this card is definitely a card that can see play as a one-off maybe, because giving you 2 coins for whenever an enemy unit dies just feels kind of good in general. Like, it just gives you so much flexibility. It's very similar to the Salamander Mage, where, you know, you get 2 coins if you do this and that. Maybe this kind of needs an adrenaline effect like the Salamander Mage, but Salamander Mage's adrenaline effect is, I think, 4 or something, which is pretty much nothing, honestly. And yeah, maybe this needs something like an adrenaline effect, but I think it's also harder to, you know, kill a unit than it is to create a tribute card or play a tribute card like Salamander Mage. But who knows, maybe this is a bit too much of a change. I wasn't really sure what to do with bronzes in Syndicate, because a lot of the bronzes in Syndicate are just very similar cards, and there's not much really design space within Syndicate that you can really work with. So I was definitely struggling the most with Syndicate. And the last bronze I have for you guys is the Cintrian Envoy. Formation, order, spawn, and summon a 1-point copy of a bronze ally on your side of the field. So this is a 6 provision card now. It used to be 4 and gave charges, and I thought, charges, they suck. Let's change this up completely. I feel like this might become a staple if it was printed like this. And you could say this is a weaker version of Adalia, because it requires the card to be on the field, and it only spawns a 1-point copy. But there's some really interesting combo potential with this card, especially because I kept the formation on the card. Things like Cintrian Knights, or like Cintrian Royal Guards. Cintrian Royal Guards is the card. Also Idaran combos with this. There's a lot of nonsense you can kind of pull off with a bronze card of this statue, but if you have 2 copies of this, I feel like that's alright. I don't think this is the effect of a gold card, realistically. I don't think you play this in every Northern Realms deck, but in the decks that you play it in, it's going to be very good, especially things like Revenants. This is very good because it spawns a 1-point copy. There's a lot of like synergies with this card, and I feel like a card like this could be quite cool for Northern Realms for sure. Like, Northern Realms was also quite difficult to design because they have very like swingy cards, very undefined numbers in their faction, because, you know, if you go into a long round and your opponent doesn't have control, Northern Realms, like a bronze card could play for like 20 points. You know, it is sometimes very difficult to design Northern Realms, especially their bronzes. But I thought this was a very good approach. I'm not sure if this card's busted or not, but I do feel like it isn't terrible by any means, and I feel like it will definitely see play even at just 6 provisions. I do feel like this card will see play. Maybe 6 provisions is too much, but I do think it is alright the way it is at the moment. Alright, so now we're gonna get into the golds. And this is my first gold. And this is the one where I'm like, okay, I don't think CPR will ever print this card, nor will they ever accept this card existing. But yeah, Dandelion Vainglory, human, deploy, destroy a random gold card. Yeah. It's an absolute meme, but it could also be really scary, right? It could really punish certain decks, and it could really punish certain sequencings, right, as well. So I'm not sure if they were ever going to print a card like this, but this is definitely more playable than the current version of Dandelion Vainglory. I just wanted to get this one out of the way because I know this one's a very memey card, but it's also kind of scary. It's got kind of both of the worlds. You know, I thought at 311 and 1 armor, it is more expensive than Geralt, but I do feel like in a lot of situations, this is actually also better than normal Geralt of Rivia or Geralt Professional, since the card doesn't really need any setup and has quite a crazy ceiling in certain situations. But obviously, I'm not sure they're ever going to print this card, but I did feel like something like this works with the flavor of the card in general, so I just thought, hey, why not just print it? And that's the neutrals gone. Let's go into the faction specific golds. I'm gonna start off with one that I'm actually kind of proud of. Iber Hattori, deploy boost self by 1 for every unit with armor. So Iber Hattori right now is unplayable, quite literally. But with this current form, it's both very flavorful with his effect, and it works with Scoia'tael because dwarves have a bunch of armor. The card has a pretty big ceiling, obviously, and it also works on enemy units. I felt like enemy units can also be part of this because something like Nilfgaard soldiers can definitely be punished when you play the Hattori. I think the card itself should also count itself as 1 armor, so it already plays as a 5. And it has quite a big ceiling. I'm not sure how good this card actually is going to be or would be if it existed, but I feel like this is probably the best way to rework Iber Hattori. I really like this one. I'm not sure what you guys think about it. I do want to know your opinions on this card because I was definitely proud when I got the, brain flash for this one. And yeah, it's definitely a really interesting card, and it works in the faction as well as just being a decent card with the archetype that it's supposed to be played in, right? So I do think I did quite well with this one. And here we have Tunnel Drill. Machine Crown Splitters. Deploy boost self by the amount of coins you have. I'm not sure how this card doesn't already exist in Syndicate, because a card like this is very easy to sort of balance, because it has a very clear ceiling of 11 points for 8 provisions, but it is a boost card, so there's also that to consider. Plays into things like Baron, Morkvarg, all of these things, all of these nonsense cards that exist. And I feel like it also works with the flavor of the card because, it's the Tunnel Drill, and the more coins in the bank, the bigger the haul of the Tunnel Drill that, is probably there for robbing some banks, right? So, pretty evil, those Crown Splitters, but I feel like this card's honestly just kind of decent in Syndicate. It might be a bit too good at, 11 max, but it is quite difficult to still get 9 coins in the bank. Even if you play things like Siggy, you'd need Siggy and this in the same turn, and it is a bit of a sequence, but the fact that the coins are interactive does make this very strong as well. You need 6 coins to be even. That shouldn't be too hard, but the stage of getting past 6 coins is actually quite difficult to happen in certain Syndicate decks, so it obviously can be played in every Syndicate deck, but a Syndicate deck that played with coins, this card would definitely see play in those. Not sure about the 8 provisions. Maybe this card should be 9. I think at 2 power it's fine though. I think at 2 power with an 11 limit, it seems pretty okay. I mean, at the current state of the game, we have 13.6 provision bronze units, so who the hell knows what they're doing over there. But yeah, I feel like the Crown Splitter's ability, this is just a very basic ability, and I wanted to give basic abilities to Syndicate for, my reworks here. And here we have Odrin, Human Soldier. Now, the reason I reworked Odrin is because Trollolol is pretty much Odrin. There's quite very little difference between those 2 cards, except Odrin is just worse in every possible way. So I thought, hey, why not just give Odrin his own unique ability of whenever you play a siege engine, its crew effect is enabled. Now, as an 8 for 8, this might be a bit too good. But at the same time, the crew effects of a lot of the machine cards aren't that great. The best one I can think of would have to be the Foltest Pride, where you still need to set up the Pride with a lot of charges for it to get good value. Then you also have the War Elephant, but it's very easy to get the crew on War Elephant anyway, so it's not really necessary. But, you know, cards that just work with the crew ability, and it also gives CDPR a lot of like design options for next expansions where they maybe add some more machines or machine effects. But who knows what they're gonna do with Northern Realms next expansion. Probably something with mages is my prediction. But yeah, if they were ever to give machines support, this card would definitely be a welcome addition. But I think 8 for 8 seems a bit too good. Yeah, it might be a bit too good. Maybe it should just be an 8 for 9 or something like that. I just feel like 8 for 8 just, you know, it feels correct. It feels good. But yeah, it probably is a bit too good at 8 for 8 because it literally has no downside. So yeah, I maybe 8 for 9 or like, I don't know, 7 for 8 could be the motive, but it's about the effect. It's about the effect, and I feel like the effect is interesting enough to justify it being shown to you guys. And next up, I have Coral. Now this, brace yourselves. I was kind of struggling with Skellige, but I really wanted to rework this card, and I thought the effect is a bit of an interesting one. So deploy, give Rupture to a non-defender unit. If it survives, spawn and summon a copy of it on a random row. So yeah, basically just get a bunch of Draco turtles, right? That's the idea behind it. Obviously, I had to add the non-defender units to it because being able to play double defender seems a bit unfair. And honestly, I feel like the only thing that I was kind of struggling with this card is the power level and just the provisions on it. Like, I really don't know how to design this card on those aspects, but I feel like its effect with Rupture and like the self damage and then being able to, you know, spawn a second unit, I don't think this should work with Veil though. I think that if you, I mean, even if with Veil, there's not many targets that can be that great apart from like a Herald, but you're spawning the Herald. You're not actually playing the Herald. You're spawning him because the Rupture happens at the end of the turn. So there's not that many targets. Like the best targets are, as I said, Draco Turtle. There's Olaf as well. Olaf is a very good target for this one. Pretty much anything that has like armor, like a Drakkar is pretty good, but no one plays Drakkar. Then there's also, that's pretty much all of the good targets. But obviously you have some armor synergies within Skellige. Also a card that I'm going to add or talk about later is going to be a card that kind of synergizes with this. And I'm just going to actually jump straight to that card. And that card is Joanna. Order, give 2 armor to a unit, charge 1, gain 1 charge whenever an adjacent unit is damaged. So I just kind of changed her from healing to armor, and I feel like that's appropriate because Skellige heal doesn't really do much anymore. Like healing in general, there's a better card anyway, that's Heme Flaminica, which has just better stats than this card. And I think armor just works better with the flavor of the card because, you know, she's an armor smith, and, you know, she creates armor. I also changed the wording to whenever an adjacent unit is damaged rather than takes damage, because those two are different. Because when it is damaged, that can also mean that a unit with armor can be damaged and still trigger this to gain a charge. Whereas if it takes damage, the unit actually has to get into the red zone of health, and then this card will gain its charges. So yeah, Joanna is a card very popular through The Witcher 3, obviously. Very popular character in that game. I do remember her quite fondly, being able to craft me some good armor that I immediately sold for some Gwent cards. And yeah, I mean, this is just, I feel like this is a slight change to a card that doesn't see any play, that could, you know, give it a little push. It doesn't have to be a great push, but it's a little push that might create more synergies or more decks that come out of it. You could like play more fun stuff with it, whereas right now you just can't really do anything with this card. Like imagine this with a Draco Turtle and like Iris. Like how crazy is that? I'll play that. I'll play that any day of the week. Next up, I brought you Vandergrift's Blade. Deploy, play a random Bronze Knight from your deck, and then whenever you play a knight, boost it by 1. So I thought that the synergy with the knights is fine. There's not that many good knights in the game anyway. I guess there's Anse's and Selkirk. I guess also Donmir is a pretty good one. But I feel like this card should definitely be a card that works with the bronze knights that exist in the game, because there's not that many bronze knights. There's the Kedweni Knight, and then there's, I think, the Cintrian Knight, and that's all the notable bronze knights that exist in the game. So this can thin out a Kedweni Knight of your deck, playing for 7 tempo already, thinning your deck by 1, and then being able to be this engine that the opponent can't really interact with. Whereas right now it's kind of like a artifact that the opponent can't interact with, but it doesn't really have any utility apart from just being a little bit of value. Where with this and like in general the knights, the bronze knights that exist in the game, it plays at least for 7 on its deploy, and then has this passive ability as well to sort of synergize with it. So yeah, Vandergrift's Blade, I thought just this little change could put the card into a bit more decks. Maybe 8 provisions is still a bit bad, but it's still uninteractive to sort of deal with. And yeah, people probably won't heat wave this, so yeah, that's just kind of decent. All right, here we have Syndicate, Ludovicus Brunnenbaum. Now, I mentioned earlier that I want to bring the basic into Syndicate, and this one's kind of crazy. Tribute 3 boost self by the amount of coins spent this round. So Syndicate has this, option to spend more than 9 coins in a round. Unlike the Tunnel Drill, which is limited by the 9 coins in your bank, this card doesn't really get limited as much because there's leader abilities that give you additional coins that you can just spend, and the card can go kind of crazy, especially with the Tribute 3. I thought if I added like a Tribute to it as well, so it has a bit more of a cost for its provisions, because the card goes very, very tall. You might have noticed that I like to go very tall in these kind of cards, especially for Syndicate right now. And I wasn't really sure what to do with Syndicate, and I thought this was kind of an interesting effect. I always thought this kind of effect would be cool in a faction, especially like Syndicate, where you can kind of like cheat the system with an effect like this. And it also has some synergies with the Black Rayla as well. Sorry, not Black Rayla, Fallen Rayla. And yeah, I mean, this is probably one of the worst cards I kind of built for, like, printed for you guys. So I'm kind of sorry about that, but hey, not everything can be perfect, right? And now we move to the Nilfgaard cards. I'm going to show both of these Nilfgaard cards together because they do synergize with each other. We go with Kelak Griffin. This card is so dead right now. I just wanted to change it somehow, which basically says shuffle a card from your hand into your deck, then draw the lowest cost gold card. Not sure how good this actually is. It might be very, very powerful, honestly. Maybe the stat line is a bit, stat line's alright, I'd say. Maybe it's a bit too good as a 6/7 with an effect like this, where you're basically allowed to just mulligan again and just, draw a card that's maybe better than the one you mulliganed. But I feel like generally, like, shuffle and deck manipulation in Nilfgaard should have never been brought to the opponent's side of the field, but rather their own deck manipulation, where they can kind of draw the cards they need to for them to just be the cheating faction. It's fair cheating in this sense, right? So compared to like Clog, where it's just like, all right, draw your golds round 1, otherwise you lose. Whereas this is like, okay, my opponent plays this card, a 6 for 7, so he can get a better card, which you never feel like that's broken or anything in any way. So I feel like this card is fine, it's fair, and it could see play, especially with the card that I'm showing you next. And that card is Fringilla Vigo. Whenever this unit is sent from your hand to the deck, boost self by 2. So here we have the synergies, obviously. You shuffle back the Fringilla, and you get back the Fringilla with your Kelak, because it is a low provision gold unit. It's very similar to Gord, I would say, where Gord is kind of uninteractive with, how he boosts himself, whereas this is more interactive, but there's some very good combos you can do with this for sure, where things like the Vicovaro Novice, or in general like Traveling Merchant, Snowdrop, Dodric even, definitely can work with this card. Also something like a Albric can definitely synergize well with this card. And I feel like this effect, some of you might know this, some of you beta players might feel like, hey, this seems kind of familiar. This used to be a Scoia'tael effect in beta Gwent when mulligans were part of Scoia'tael. And I really loved mulligans, man. I would play infinite amounts of mulligan archetype if it was back in the game, but it's not. They just kind of like went for, okay, we're gonna ruin the opponent's deck instead of making our own deck an interesting like part of our game plan. Like I really want CDPR to like work with mulligans again. I really just want this card to exist in the game. I'm not sure what you guys think about this, but I love like this kind of design where it's like, all right, find the card in round 1, that's pretty good. Get the card again, you know, that's pretty good. Keep shuffling it back into your deck, and you have like a, I don't know, 16-point finisher or something. I don't know, like maybe the card is too powerful at its stat line. I wasn't really sure what stat line to give it. I thought 4/7 seemed pretty fair because it is kind of draw dependent at the end of the day. But even if you just manage to mulligan it twice, it still is an 8 for 7, which isn't the worst, but it obviously has a higher ceiling than that, which you can, you know, work for. And that's what I like. Things like tactical decision as well. Pretty cool, you know, abilities that just exist in the game that could synergize with an effect like this. And here I have Toad Prince. Deploy melee, consume a unit with 3 or less power. This is pretty much the same. Then move it to your graveyard. Now, this card isn't very favored right now in monsters, but it could definitely be a good tech against current existing decks like Ceres or Madoc. Like, imagine eating a Madoc with this Toad Prince and it going into your graveyard. And you play Madoc yourself. Like, how funny would that be? But yeah, I feel like Toad Prince needs an effect like this where it has kind of like a graveyard hate ability as well. Because Monsters doesn't really cheat a lot. Monsters is kind of like a vanilla faction when it comes to things like this. And if they have like one cheat card, I think that's fine. Especially like Toad Prince. It's like, in the worst case scenario, he plays for a 9, and it still is good value, like it's a 9 for 8. But he is a bit conditional because it requires your opponent to play a unit with 3 power, which has become less common, by the way. And yeah, Toad Prince can work with things like Madoc and Roach against like Ceres and stuff, or like banishing a Shield Maiden. So yeah, I feel like Toad Prince is definitely a card that in this form would see play in competitive decks, especially monster decks. So I thought this was a cool change, a change that might put the card into playability again. I mean, the card's not terrible. It's just like, if it had an effect like this, it would be really, really good, wouldn't it? And now we have Imlerith, ending off monsters cards with the deployability. Your highest unit is forced to duel the highest enemy unit. So, yeah, I mean, if some of you, like, a lot of you beta players might be like, this guy just wants beta Gwent back. And to a certain degree, I kind of do, but obviously, there were some flaws within that game, but abilities like this, especially in monsters, don't feel that bad. It's like a kind of more interesting version of Imlerith's Wrath, where it really is situational. And I mean, it pretty much is just Imlerith's Wrath, right? I don't know, like, I didn't really have any idea what to do with monsters. I just kind of like this ability of, like, being able to duel a unit, especially with Wyvern. That's pretty cool, because, like, Wyvern has the armor. And in general, like, armor in monsters isn't that common, so it could bring armor into monsters, or just, like, boost units anyway, or, like, it could just be a powerful card. I don't know. I feel like this card's pretty okay. I don't know. I kind of just did this one. I didn't really know what else to do for monsters. There weren't that many effects I could think of. I was trying to do, like, some swarm idea as well, but I just looked at Imlerith and was like, hey, this card's kind of bad. Let's just make it good again. They could also bring back, like, the very old Imlerith, which was 7 power, set a unit's power to 7, which was pretty cool. Like, that was a pretty neat effect. They never brought that back, even though they said they would. And yeah, I mean, like, yeah, it's Imlerith. It's a card that exists, and if it exists like this, I'm not sure how good it actually would be. I think the stat line is a bit off. Maybe it needs a bit more power. I think the provisions are fine, but I think it needs a bit more power. And of course, I save the best for last. My lovely Yorvith's Gambit. Don't worry, guys. It's not going to be the effect that it was in Beta Gwent. I was really considering doing that, but... So basically, if you don't know, the ability in Beta Gwent was like Tavern Brawl, but on a unit. And it was able to, you know, duel any unit. Because, like, that was pretty broken, but I feel like with no unit Scoia'tael, that ability would be a bit too good. So I thought, okay, what else exists that could work with Jorvik? And I just thought, hey, elves. Just make elves better, right? Trigger an elf unit's deploy ability. That seems pretty decent. For 9 provisions as a special, I think the best combo would be something like Vernasiel Front Row, or something like Isengrim, maybe even Yavin. Also some bronze units can be pretty okay with this. At 9 provisions, it's basically like a Veraxis on a special card. I didn't give it the... Oh, I actually didn't give it a tag. I didn't want it to give it the nature tag. I feel like that would be a bit too good, but who knows? Maybe it's fine with the nature tag. I gave it the elf tag, which it obviously shouldn't have. It should have maybe something like tactic, which it does have in its original form. So yeah, that is Jorvik's Gambit. I feel like this is a pretty decent, like neat ability. I'm not sure about the provisions. I feel like 9 was alright, especially if it pairs up with something like a front row Vernasiel or like a Isengrim. Like being able to re-trigger that ability seems pretty crazy to me. But yeah, who knows? Maybe at 8 this is even fine. So yeah. And yeah, that was Mr. Hobble1's rework ideas. Yeah, some of these cards aren't very balanced, I would say, but you know, I do feel like some of these cards, they're actually pretty good. Now, I really want to know your guys' opinion on these custom cards. I know I trash talk a lot when I do custom card reviews, and I don't want you guys to hold back on some of these. Like, I do feel like the Coral and the Imlerith are a bit sus. I definitely feel like those are not the best. But apart from that, I feel like every other card seems okay or like semi-decent. Like, not necessarily competitive, but reworks that could change, you know, the meta or change certain decks or make certain decks more interesting or more viable. And yeah, that's just pretty much all I tried to do with this. I didn't try to make every deck competitive or like every card competitive. Just wanted to add, you know, cards that don't see play into maybe being more playable in the current form of the game. But even if you disagree with all the cards, you probably didn't enjoy the video, but I still hope you did enjoy the video. And if you did, please leave a like, subscribe for more Gwent content, and I'll see you soon.